I mean, do you know if there were many people in the building?
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Can you see it? I can see it on the shot.
Oh my.
Something else has just, and that looks more like a 747.
So I was in second grade.
I was in second grade, maybe.
I was at work in Canada.
I was on the road driving back from elementary school. I just dropped my kids off.
I was at a Sears Auto Center. Actually, it was store number 911.
Look at the hole! Holy shit! It was a plane? It was definitely a plane?
They said a 737 plane.
I think that was a suicide.
That was a terrorist.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's all you know, right?
I don't know, guy.
Everything's fucked up.
Where were you on 9/11 and how did you feel at the time of the attacks?
9/11, I was in second grade. I can't even remember what class I was in, but all I remember is a bunch of kids got picked up from school. They didn't have anything on the TVs, nothing on the intercom, just kids kept on leaving school. I was one of the only ones who stayed. Me and my two best friends at the time were the only ones who hadn't gotten picked up. Both of our parents were, or all of our parents were working at the time. But once I did get picked up, I was obviously mad because I didn't get to go home. Everyone else did. But my grandmother, who, typical Italian grandmother, she obviously it was a serious situation, but she didn't fully understand it, just like most people probably didn't. I'd gotten in the car and she goes, "These people bombed New York City." And me, I was like a World War II buff and I liked history, military history. I'm thinking actual like bombers flying over New York City and bombing it. And when I got home, I turned on the news. Still, I was in second grade, but you know, I would like to say I was mature for my age then in terms of what I could understand. And that's when I realized that, you know, planes had hit the World Trade Center, Pentagon, and the other one that had crashed in that field in Pennsylvania. And I was scared, but I wouldn't necessarily say scared for myself, but more so for my grandfather and my uncle. They were both firefighters at the time, and obviously we all know what happened to the firefighters that went into those buildings. And I was under the impression that those attacks weren't done and that somehow, some way they would get called in to have to go deal with that. And then for a long time I had a fear of flight for a while. I've never been on a plane. Now I'm over that, but I was messed up for a while.
So I was in second grade and I was at Bingham School. Obviously we didn't have like TVs or anything like that, so I didn't really know anything like what happened. I remember some kids getting picked up from school early. I heard afterwards my brother was in 5th grade and they had like radios on and they were hearing everything like as it was being released, which I think is kind of crazy. And then I came home from school on the bus, like everything was normal and I still didn't really know what happened. And then the news was on when I got home. At that age I was just like, wow, something just like horrific happened.
On 9/11, I was in kindergarten actually, and I remember I was in class and just about everybody got called out of school. Dad came and picked me up, went home. I really had no clue what was going on because I was so young, but all I knew at the time is I was happy to get home from school.
It was heart-wrenching to know that something like that would happen in New York City. I was living in one of the boroughs in New York at that time. It was really a difficult time, I think, for everyone in New York because we actually know the vast or the bigness of the explosion that happened and everything else that went on, and it took a toll on a lot of us. It was maybe 2 weeks of like being depressed, not knowing what to do, hard to go on with everyday life. The kids were very disturbed about it. It was a really difficult time for New Yorkers.
During 9/11, I was probably 5 or 6, no, maybe 4 or 5. But I remember getting taken out of preschool by my grandma and brought to her house, and then my parents didn't want me watching the news.
A plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center.
Just because they didn't want, I don't know, a little kid to see exactly what was going on.
That morning I was at a Sears Auto Center, and we were distracted from what we were doing by the fact that the TV, which had a moment before been showing Regis and Kathy Lee, Suddenly cut to a live news shot of one of the towers smoking. And so they had taken the live shot, and we had begun to congregate around the TV to watch the coverage, because that was shocking enough. But planes had struck the World Trade Center before, small planes. Some other buildings in New York had been hit too. And at first we didn't know what was going on, but then among the most shocking things I've ever seen was we watched live as the second plane hit. The place fell silent. We were all completely nonplussed.
Do you believe Osama bin Laden had motives in attacking certain buildings?
I believe so. He probably wants to kill a lot of people, so that's why he aimed on those buildings.
If we're looking at this from Osama bin Laden's views and what he stood for in terms of, his beliefs in Eastern culture and whatnot, motive for those buildings would make sense if you look at the ideology of it, with the fact that the World Trade Centers basically symbolize, kind of the West and what they don't like: power, money, commerce, the World Trade Center. And obviously there's a lot of individuals in those buildings from multiple countries that they don't agree with, that they don't like. So that would make sense for it to be point of attack. And obviously the Pentagon, same deal, military power, military strength, where obviously they butt heads. They just don't get along. However, looking at it, and I know that this probably sounds crazy to some, maybe not to others, but I actually don't believe that Osama bin Laden had any motive at all to do it, nor do I think he had anything to do with it at the time, but that's neither here nor there.
I mean, from what I've read, that was kind of why he chose the targets that he chose, because it was, like the Twin Towers was attacking like our economy, basically. The Pentagon was attacking our military. One of them was supposedly headed to the White House, which is like attacking our government.
I'm sure he did. He picked buildings in the biggest city in America, which really makes a statement, and two of the tallest buildings in the country, which I guess if he was looking to kill people, it'd be the biggest bang for what he did. So many people in such a little area.
There's no question. World Trade Center was an icon and had in fact been attacked before. In every establishing shot of every movie of the time, and this is one of the things that makes 9/11 hard for people who are my age, is every time you see Sleepless in Seattle or any of the movies of the era, the first or second shot that establishes you're looking at New York City, Manhattan from the World Trade Center end, Twin Towers. They went after the biggest possible target.
How do you feel the nation's leaders handled 9/11, and what would you have done if you were president?
Well, it's hard to separate how I feel about it now from all the stuff that we found out since, all the things we found out happened. Our leaders eventually came out and rallied us around supporting New York City and supporting the victims who were really from all over through dealing with the aftermath of 9/11. Right away, there was kind of silence. The first person we heard from was the mayor of New York City. The appearance of the mayor on Saturday Night Live, the appearance of the mayor at the first sports games that were played in the city afterward, very, very, very important in rallying the country.
I think President Bush did everything that he could in the way he should have done it. If I was president, I probably would have not done much different. Definitely try and figure out who attacked us and retaliated just like our president did.
Can't really say whether or not our nation's leaders handled it perfectly. It could always be better, but the way Bush handled it, I think he was good by going to war. See, like if he hadn't, then we'd sort of be second-handedly surrendering ourselves. I say it was a good thing that we went to war, maybe not stayed that long. I'm not exactly sure on facts or anything, or why we stayed for exact reasons, but it just seems like it could have been maybe resolved quicker. If I was president, I think I would have declared war, but I don't think I would have made it last, if I had control, last as long as it did.
It's like such a tricky question. I would say the president and the leaders of America did well with what they had at the time that they made the decisions. That being said, I think it's kind of a lose-lose scenario no matter what you do. You know, we ended up going over to the Middle East, bringing the military over to the Middle East, and some people would say that brewed some negative feelings out of the Middle East, which kind of led to more attacks. But if I were president, what would I have done? Probably the same thing, but I would imagine that I'd probably have been more influenced by whatever advisor happened to be giving me the advice at the time or something like that.
I think they handle it pretty well, and if I was in there, I would have tried to look for Osama bin Laden as well, or who is behind that terrorist attack.
Okay. Thanks.
Have the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan protected the U.S. against major terrorist attacks?
I believe they have a little bit, not to the full extent as what it should have been, but it's definitely settled some arguments that we have had in the past.
I would say yes and no. Yes, because it made the public aware and gave us a pro-USA attitude, like a nationalism kind of effect. But then I would say it also provoked more attacks in the future because we're hearing about mass shootings driven by Islamic religion and beliefs often these days. So I want to say it could have had a positive effect and also could have a negative long-term effect. It may be hard to tell right now.
There have been other terrorist attacks since then. Certainly not on the same scale, which some people would argue is kind of a result of the war.
I don't think that they have at all. We've had domestically, like we've had the shooting in Orlando, we've had the shooting in Las Vegas, we had that shooting in Texas at the church. Like there's just been so many mass shootings, so many attacks, whether it's related to ISIS or just other types of terrorism. There was the guy that drove the bus down the bike lane. The wars haven't really deterred anything. If anything, it just caused more people to die.
No, I think if anything, they probably have encouraged him. I think our presence in those two, for lack of a better word, war zones, has been the greatest recruiting tool Al Qaeda and later, and now ISIS have ever had. We demonstrably went in after the wrong people for the wrong reasons. We knew relatively soon after the attacks who had been responsible, at least for getting on the planes and flying them into the ground in Pennsylvania and near the Pentagon and into the towers in New York City. We had a pretty good idea. We knew how they learned to fly. We learned an awful lot about them very quickly, including who had supported them. That came up well before we decided that Saddam Hussein was the problem, mysteriously. And beyond going there for the wrong reasons in the first place, went there twice, for which I can find no excuse. from what I understand of the military, we had the wherewithal to do a lot better job the first time we were there with a coalition than we were able to do after. You know, stopping short of taking Baghdad and occupying Iraq the first time was a huge mistake. And in Afghanistan, that was hubris. It was clearly, I think, aimed at showing that we could do what the Russians had not been able to do, which is bring them to heel. And when the Russians discovered what people have been discovering for 2,000 years, you cannot regulate that region. You cannot beat those people in that place. We learned, they learned. We're still learning it. We're in the wrong places. We should have brought Saudi Arabia under greater scrutiny right away, and Pakistan under greater scrutiny right away. And it didn't surprise me at all that that's where we found Bin Laden.
I wouldn't say they have. Reason I say that, you can look at things that have happened. Just the U.S. alone, you got the Boston Marathon, and I don't know what the definition of major is, but that's an event where there are thousands and thousands of people, and there weren't as many casualties clearly as there were like 9/11, but that's still a big event, probably the biggest, one of, if not the biggest terrorist event in the U.S. since 9/11. If you look at Europe, there are so many attacks in Europe where there are just hundreds of people dying. And honestly, I think the only thing keeping the U.S. from seeing more of those large-scale attacks is the fact that the Atlantic Ocean's in between us. If they had easier access to the United States, just like physically being able to get to us, I don't think the wars really would have prevented that, because as much as the wars had gone in and fought like Taliban, Al-Qaeda and all that, nowadays you have ISIS and you can kill off like people and everything, but you can't kill off an idea. And there's always going to be bad people with bad ideas and bad intentions. So
it's been a long day without you, my friend, and I'll tell you all about it when I see you again. We've come a long